Hey guys, and how's it going? So I was just wanting to do a really quick video on this. This is an old Lionel whistling tender, one of the Lionel Lions ones. I'm not sure if it's a pre-war one or not. It's got the newer-ish couplers, but it's the old style tender. But this thing, I've had it for a little while, not super long time, maybe 6 months or something. I can't really remember when I got it, but it never has run, and I guess I never really looked at it apparently because I thought I remember working on this thing, but apparently I didn't because you can see the state of the motor, and it never has worked. I just started working on it today because I remembered that it didn't work, and the most it would do was the thing to turn on the whistle would cycle, but the motor wouldn't actually spin. And then when I got looking at the motor after I worked on this thing, thinking it was the issue, I never really looked at this very closely. I looked at it, and one of the brushes didn't even look like it was there, so only one of the brushes was touching the motor, so that was most likely the reason. And then I took it apart, and it never probably has been cleaned ever, and it is disgusting, as you can see it, and the brushes are just as bad. And I don't know if I have short-term memory or something, because I feel like I worked on this, but I have no idea. I must not have ever taken it apart, because I have another whistling tender, one of the post-war ones, that I have worked on, and it works fine. But I guess I have never worked on this one. So I'm going to clean it up, and we'll see if we can get it working. Now you can see how good this thing looks now, and the motor is nice and clean, except for that piece of carbon that I just blew off. But then you can see the brushes as well. They're also really nice and clean. So I think this thing might actually work now, if all we have to do is put it back together. I also cleaned out the brush holders, and earlier I cleaned off the contacts for the whatever this thing is, the magneto kind of thing, to make it work. So now all we'll do is put it back together. Now that we've got everything cleaned up, these things are pretty easy, relatively, to put back together. I got the inside of this cleaned up, so the only thing really to do with this is put everything back together. So these, they just have two screws that hold it to the base, but first thing you have to do is I'm going to take this screw back off, if I can find a screwdriver that's the right one, because this is where I'll just keep that on for now, but we'll put this back in the tender. And since all the wires and everything are soldered back on, this one you usually have to take off to be able to pull this plate up if you ever do work on one of these. So these two screws here, they just go through the holes on the bottom. So put that back on. Usually easier to put one on at a time than try and have both of them on there at the same time, and having to try and fight them. I think that is the wrong one, I believe. I think these are different threads on these, since they're going into two different size holes, I believe. So we'll see if one of those will go in or not. Usually you have to use a screwdriver since it is going into a metal piece. Technical difficulties, but what I was saying was the way these screws go in, usually you have to use a screwdriver to get them in first before you actually screw them in. But I think this one, they're kind of hard to get in, actually. That one is, but got it in there. And then this one just goes in the hole in the middle, which holds on, I think, the other side of the motor. So that's back in. The last screw that you need to take off is this one, just so you can put this contactor back on, because this is the only screw that holds down the little magneto thing. So those are kind of necessary to have on if you do take this piece out, because otherwise there's nothing holding it on besides the wires, and those can break pretty easily if you're not careful. So that's back on, and the only thing left to do is put the tender shell back on. But I'm going to take it over to the track first and test it. So I've got the tender back on the track, and now for the moment of truth to see if this thing actually works. And it's doing the same thing as it was before. So let's see. I think the contactor on the magneto thing isn't quite working. So let's see. I'll be right back. After a few more seconds of testing, this thing actually does work. The way that these whistling tenders work, or at least this one, is that when you press the whistle button, this little plate that isn't quite straight here goes up, and you can see the contactor there touches the metal plate. So when the whistle button on the transformer isn't being pressed, it's in this position, but then when you press it, the magneto pulls it up and contact is made, and then the whistle turns on. And I think it's the magneto wasn't kind of working, so it just wasn't pulling the plate up enough, but now it seems to be working, sort of. And it actually works pretty well. I have the transformer turned up a little bit high, so we'll see if it'll... But it is working, so I'll put the tender shell back on and maybe run it around. So I just put the tender on the back of this train here, which is the Lionel 2037, so we're going to see if it can actually get the engine to do any, or the tender to do anything. And it works. While on a moving train, which is really good. Have to let it run around. I never really have run that tender around. Seems to be working quite well now. So I'm very pleased about that, because I've had that tender for quite a while and it never has worked. I guess I just never really looked into it hard enough. But I'm going to say that's going to be it for this sort of quick video. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.